Okay, so my topic for the project number 2 is facial feedback. So, kind of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. First section is going to be the history of it, looking at the background information. Um, Next is going to be defining the features of the effect. Does facial expression control the way you feel inside? That's kind of the main question we're going to be asking ourselves throughout the entire presentation. Next, we're going to be looking at how emotions in the brain intersect with each other and connect. Lastly, we're going to be talking about the application to your life. So, first was a quote that I thought was pretty connective to my topic. The face expresses effects both to others and self via feedback, which is more rapid and more complex than any stimulation of which a slower moving visual organ are capable. This is by Sylvan Tompkins. He is one of the philosophers that was a part of the facial feedback effect. Okay, so the process, looking at the history. So in 1840s, philosopher and psychologist William James presented the idea of the basis of emotions has to do with how your body experiences emotions. So how your body reacts to emotions interferes with how you feel. Charles Darwin in 1870 observed how animals use facial expression to interact with each other. Then he suggested the concept of facial feedback. Later in 1988, almost a century later, three men, Fritz Stracht, Leonard Martin, and Sabine Strupper, pioneered a way to measure a change in one's happiness by using a pen and cartoon. I'm going to be talking a little later about how this whole experiment kind of developed into the process. And then lastly, in 2016, a large-scale report was conducted with the purpose of meticulously replicating the three men's study in 1988. And they did it across 17 different countries with varying cultures, but they failed to reproduce the same results. So what is facial feedback? The long definition of facial feedback is it refers to the influence of obtrusive manipulations of facial behavior of emotional outcomes. So that was a very wordy definition. So kind of breaking it down is, I'm going to use an example. So if I were to tell you right now to start smiling for the next minute, this definition would say by the end of that minute, you are guaranteed or have a better outcome of being happier by the end of that minute than if you were to frown for the next minute. So it's kind of how your behavior influences your emotional outcome. What do you do with your body language? How do you interact with others kind of influences how you feel emotionally. So going back to those three men, their test in 1988, I called it the pen test. I'm sure there's another name for it out there on the internet somewhere, but I called it the pen test. So the pen test was performed by having an individual put a pen in their mouth while watching cartoons. The whole idea of this was the person was supposed to smile throughout the thing, and it was kind of showing when they smiled with it, they were happier, when they frowned, they were sadder. Another kind of cool, interesting fact I found was people who get Botox have a harder time of expressing their emotions, which makes their facial feedback not as prevalent. So going back to that question of, does facial feedback really show what your emotions are on the inside? Botox is a good example of it because Botox lessens the dramatic effects of expressions, so it's harder for them to see your facial feedback. So how do emotions in the brain connect? So first of all, it's important to note that the emotion is associated with the limbic system. And diving a little bit into history, in 1970, Paul Ekman proposed 6 basic emotions: anger, fear, surprise, disgust, joy, and sadness. For many psychologists and different scientists, emotions are kind of broken up into different categories. Some only believe there's 4, whereas others believe there's 26. So Paul had a pretty basis of 6, so I felt that was pretty good. It's important to note that there's 3 brain structures closely linked with emotions: the amygdala, the insula or the insular cortex, and a structure in the midbrain called the pericortical gray. And that's a little diagram if you like to look at it. So the 3 structures kind of diving into how they interact with emotion. So first, the amygdala. It integrates emotions, emotional behavior, and motivation. So this